Right, hello folks, and we have nearly reached the end of our epic journey through Dr. Dave Regis's suggested openings. What have we done so far? We've seen e4 from the white point of view, and we've seen moves to play against pretty much anything and everything that's sensible that black can do. And then against e4, when we're playing with the black pieces, we've seen the good doctor recommend the French defense, and particularly this variation with the early c5. But what are we going to do against moves other than e4? For example, d4, c4, knight f3, g3, blah, blah, blah. Well, over the next 4 or 5 videos, let me have a quick think. I think it's probably going to be 5. We're going to look at some possible setups for you to use as black. And the first one we're going to go for is called the Tarrasch Defense. Basically, that involves pawn here, pawn here, pawn here, and being prepared to accept an isolated queen's pawn sometimes. So that will mean that the e pawn and the c pawn go, and this pawn ends up on d5. We've seen that before in other situations, in other videos, so we know what is involved there. And occasionally in the Tarrasch system, you'll actually let one of the pawns go. You'll actually sacrifice a pawn for open lines, quick development, da, 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 da. So classic Dr. Dave setup. But there's also an option B in a couple of videos' time. If you want something a bit more solid and a bit slower, a bit more closed, we've got options there too. And then we've actually got a third option in the Dutch defense as well. So we've got plenty of choices coming up against d4, c4, and so on and so on and so on in the next few videos. So we'll start with the Tarrasch defense anyway. Now, Dr. Dave's given me 10 games in the book for this, and 10 is like the most awkward number because I don't want to do 3 episodes of like 3 each. It'd be quite short episodes, but 5 might be a bit long, but whatever. We're going to do 5 games each in 2 episodes. Hopefully I won't drone on for too long. Now let's turn off the lines. And our first game, Spencer versus Wheatley, South Wales, 2002. So here we go. So d4, d5. So first comment is d5 is obviously absolutely fine, but you might want to play a slightly different move order here. Because e6 is going to be our second move anyway, you can switch the order. And the point is, if you play e6 first, white might not play c4. White might play e4, and then you can go straight back to the French defense. The other thing is, that although the Tarrasch system that we're going to look at in the next couple of videos involves d5, actually, if you've played e6, you also have the option to go into the Dutch defense, which is another of Dr. Dave's recommendations in 3 or 4 videos' time. So there might be a case for playing e6 before d5. Just a thought. But d5 played in our game. c4, the Queen's Gambit. You can take the pawn, but there's lots of theory to learn if you decide to go that way. And that's not what we're recommending here. We're going for e6. And after knight c3, and by the way, you could play the same thing against here or here as well, c5. Okay, so this is our Tarrasch defense with our 3 pawns set up here. So you must be prepared as black. There are 1 or 2 lines where you'll sacrifice a pawn in the middle of the board after all these exchanges. But for really quick development and a quick possible attack and lots of space and open lines. Lots of tension in the middle of the board with this one. Look, everything can take everything else. The knight's hitting in the middle of the board as well. So's the queen for black and so's the queen for white. There's possible checks on these 2 squares for both sides. It's quite sharp stuff. So let's see how this game goes. White played c takes d5, fine. And c takes d4 from black. Actually, I might leave the lines on for a change here, just so you guys can see the possibilities as we go along. I think we'll even put on 3 lines, so we've got multiple options. So lots of choices in this position for black. You can see the computer is recommending e takes d5, going for the isolated queen's pawn position, but c takes d4 is the 3rd choice, and plus 0.4 is basically level. So nothing wrong with it, and that's played in the game. White goes for the move queen to a4, which is not only a check, but will hit this pawn. So queen a4 is played. Bishop d7, black develops a piece and blocks the check. And white plays queen d4, probably thinks they've won a pawn. Well, to a point they have, but there's more to it. Takes from black. and queen takes from white. And this is interesting, isn't it? Because white's clearly got an extra pawn. There it is. It's sat there on e2. But the computer's only saying plus 0.4, give or take, not plus 1. What that means is that although, yeah, white's got an extra pawn, the computer is saying, actually, black's got a lot of compensation for this pawn. There's a bit of a lead in development. This queen's a target in the middle of the board. There's lots of open lines already for the bishops. Maybe there's enough here that black can make up for losing this pawn, for sacrificing a pawn. So queen takes d5. Now, black plays knight to c6, which is the top move. So that's good news. Obviously means they know their theory. They've played the best move. And now white plays a move that isn't in the top three. And white plays e4. And I mean, it's clearly not completely awful because it still says level. I mean, 0.00. You don't get chances much more level than that. But too bold, as Dr. Dave calls it in his book. And here's why. So black develops another piece and takes an attack on the queen at the same time. So the queen's now got to move. And she goes back to d1. Okay, fine. Bishop to c5. So black has now developed. Now look at what's happening here. Yeah, white's got an extra pawn, woo. But black has developed all four pieces and is pretty much ready to castle if they want to. White's developed one piece. So for the price of an extra pawn, black has got at least a 3-move lead in development, possibly 4. And that's why, even though black is a pawn down, look, the computer actually slightly prefers the black position because of all the activity, all of the development, all of the, not that because that's cheating, all of the possibilities for black's pieces, all of these developed pieces. Yeah, so interesting. So where did we get to? Okay, bishop c5 was played. So bishop to d3 is played in our game. White develops and tries to defend the pawn. Okay. Queen to b6, so another good move from black. So the queen bishop battery attacking f2, and because the queen's eyeing up b2, this bishop can't actually develop because queen takes b2 is a possibility. So white decides to play queen e2, which defends both things. Perfectly logical. By the way, the computer's now saying minus 0.6, minus 0.7. So even with the extra pawn, computer still prefers black here. And now black bishop to g4. Which is obviously good enough. It's hitting the queen. Various things that black can do, white can do, sorry, you could play f3 to block the attack when the bishop will come back. But look at the black squares, them very, very nasty. You can put the knight in the way, absolutely, to block the attack. And then knight d4's coming, and that's not very pleasant either because there'll be a pin. Yeah, lots of compensation here. Or, well, in the game, white played queen to d2. And now the computer just absolutely likes the black position. Isn't this incredible? Even though black's a pawn down, this lack of development, this queen that must have made at least 4 or 5 moves in the first 12 moves now, the fact that the king's stuck in the middle and isn't castled, computer's actually preferring to be a pawn down and be playing with the black pieces. And now in this position, castles is played. It's the top move. So the king goes to safety on the queen's side. And this has the advantage of putting the black rook absolutely opposite the enemy queen and pinning this bishop. So very, very nice indeed. White develops knight to f3. Okay, fair enough. And black goes straight for bishop takes here in our game, which is the second move. Third, there we go. It's now the top move. So bishop takes, and obviously white's going to recapture. Although curiously, the computer was actually recommending castles and just leaving the knight alone, which is interesting. So let's turn the lines off and see if we can get to the stage where you guys can work out the next move. So takes, it's now minus 4.5. Knight to e5 is played in the game because this bishop is pinned. Remember, what did we say? Queen to e2 is played and knight takes check. And in fact, white resigns here. I mean, what are you going to do? It's a -5 position. The king's got to move. What's the computer suggesting as the actual winning move? Bishop takes. Yeah, I thought so. So we've got 3 pieces all attacking here. So you can just take the bishop if you take the pawn with the bishop. It's just horrible. It's just horrible. Yeah, nothing more to say, really. This is just crushing. So that's a really good example of what can happen in the Tarrasch opening, the Tarrasch system. If white gets a bit greedy and tries to take the extra pawn, you can just develop super quickly, lots of active pieces, and you have a real chance to win the game early. Okay, our second one is from Soest. Don't know where that is. S-O-E-S-T. I don't know where that is, but Heinemann against Stade, and we're in the year 1996. So let's have a little look at how this one goes. So D4 and D5, C4 and E6. A quick aside here, by the way, against bishop to C5, bishop to C5, that's because I'm looking at the board upside down, bishop to F4, you can also play C5 against the London as well. Perfectly doable, and you'll find that will come down in time. It will come down a little bit from plus 0.5, but this is very playable against the London. There you go, told you it would, against the London system as well, should you come up against it. But anyway, we're looking at more classical chess here. So C4, E6, knight to C3, let's turn the lines off a minute, and C5. Okay, C takes D5, and in this game, black plays C takes D4, queen to A4 check, so much the same as the last game so far, bishop to D7, queen takes D4, E D5, queen D5, knight C6, and in this game, knight to F3 from white, so a developing move. Okay, knight to, you'll notice, by the way, again, computer's saying pretty level, even though white's got the extra pawn. So the same thing as in the previous game. Knight to F6, attacking the queen. Queen goes back to D1. And bishop to C5 from black. So eyeing up this weak square. Maybe black will be able to do horrible things there. Who knows? Still very, very level. And bishop to G5 from white. And Dr. Dave writes in his book, understandable, but too bold. And yeah, the advantage, well, it's level, but it's now maybe, if anything, computers slightly preferring black again. Let's see how the game continues. So queen to B6, same move as in the last game. So we're eyeing up this square. And of course, this is now not defended because the bishop's moved away from C1. E3 played by white. And black goes straight for queen takes here. Why not? Attacking the knight. Cunning way to defend it by white. Plays bishop takes F6. Interesting idea, defending backwards. Pawn takes. And now white's got to do something about this knight, and they play queen to C1. Now, there's a really nice move from black now. Not queen takes queen, but bishop to A3. And this is a great move because it's threatening queen takes queen now, because if rook takes, then bishop takes. But the other thing is you can't play queen takes queen because bishop takes, and you fork the rook and the knight, and the rook can't go to this square to defend the knight because the bishop will take it. It's a lovely move, bishop to A3. So white plays knight to E2, putting another defender onto the queen. But unfortunately, this won't stop black winning the exchange. So that means winning a rook for a bishop or a knight. So rook is better than a bishop or a knight. Knight to B4 is played. So eyeing up this square and this square, particularly this one, because it's a fork on the king and the queen. What are you going to do? Well, black decides to play queen takes. Bishop takes, hitting the rook. Rook to D1 is played in the game. And bishop to A4. And in this position, white resigned. A little dramatic maybe to resign, but they have to lose an exchange in this position. There's just no way to get away without dropping a rook. For instance, I don't know, let's say we put the rook to, we'll put it, where can we put it? I mean, there's hardly any safe squares. Let's say we put the rook here. What are we going to do as black? Well, my guess would be we'd probably go knight to C2 check, but let's just see. Oh no, it's going to attack the rook first, actually, thinking about it. Yeah, king to E7, that was my, yeah, rook to D4, and then knight to C2 now, was it? No, knight to C2 was an option, knight to C2 check. Oh, or just bishop takes straight away, yeah. Okay, cool. There was another option in this position here. If I just go back, white could have played rook to B1, But after this, you're still in all sorts of trouble, really. What are we going to play? Why are we not playing? Oh, okay. Sorry, I'm just working things out in my brain. So we can play here to attack the rook. And if rook takes bishop, knight to here is check. King moves, knight takes rook. So yeah, whatever we do here, black is just winning the exchange and is better. Possibly a bit early for white to have resigned, but you can see how they got into a bit of a pickle. And a bit of help there for me with the computer as well, I must admit. Yeah, cool. Okay, let's have a look at game 3. We've got Hansen against Nielsen in Aalborg. I think that's Denmark, 1947. So, okay, we can rattle through the first few moves because they're very, very similar to what we've seen. So d4, d5, c4, e6, knight c3, c5, c takes d5, e takes d5. So slightly different method here. Knight takes f3, knight to c6, and g3 from white. So going for the fianchettoed bishop, knight to f6, bishop to g2, bishop to e7. Remember, in this game, white's not going for the extra pawn. White's not going grabbing the pawn. Castles, and bishop g5, bishop e6. So all nice, sensible developing moves. Rook to c1. All still pretty level at the minute. And black plays c4. So that breaks the tension in the middle of the board. Now these two pawns aren't looking at each other, and we've got a fixed structure in the middle of the board. Knight to e5 from white, and rook to c8 from black. And Dr. Dave writes in the book, black guesses that white is going to play his next move and digs a big hole for white to fall into. f4. Yeah, and there goes the bar back to -1 and a bit. So a bit of an advantage to black all of a sudden. A very natural move, isn't it? To just sort of defend your knight in the middle of the board. Okay. But knight takes d4. And now we've got a problem. So straight away, you can't play queen here because bishop here is just winning the queen. She's pinned to the king, so the queen is lost. So we can't do that. In the actual game, white tried bishop takes f6, pawn takes to kick this knight away. The knight goes back to f3, knight to f5. Excuse me, sorry, I'm just misreading the book. Queen to d2 was played, and bishop to c5. And white resigned at this point. Why? Well, basically this square and this diagonal. You see, although the material looks pretty level, I mean, black's a pawn up in theory. It's 7 pawns against 6, but the pawns themselves aren't particularly exciting. That's not the point. How are you going to defend against all this? See, if you play king here to get out of the check, bishop here is just hitting the queen and winning the exchange because the queen will move and you win a rook. So what are you going to do? You can't put that here because obviously that's just a gross blunder. You just lose the queen. So yeah, so another game there, very clever game, where the Tarrasch defense wins quite quickly. All I would say, however, of course, is in this position, if white doesn't play the silly move f4, then you've just got a dead level game, about 0.00 as I speak. There we go. And yeah, lots of chess to be played. So interesting stuff. Okay, 2 more games to play for this video. And this next one, we've got some actual real serious names from the past. This one is between Milan Vidmar and Karl Schlechter from 1912. Now, these two are top players in the early 1900s. And Schlechter certainly played for the World Championship. I think he drew a World Championship match with Lasker. But obviously, in those days, at a draw, the world champ kept his title. I'm pretty sure that's right. Don't think Vidmar ever played for the World Championship, but he was always there in these big tournaments back at the turn of the century. So we're going to go straight through this game. There's very little comment from Dr. Dave on this one. So let's just go straight through the moves and see where we go with these 2 great players. D4, D5, Schlechter black, of course, here, playing the Tarrasch. C4, E6, knight to C3, and C5. c takes d5, e takes d5. Notice that they're not scared of the fact that after pawn takes pawn, white can in theory win this pawn. We've seen what happens if white gets greedy. It's very, very risky. So instead, knight to f3 from Vidmar, knight to c6, and g3. So fine, all sensible, safe developing moves. Bishop here. And now Vidmar, Schlechter decides to swap. Pawn takes, knight takes, and bishop c5. Now, black's pretty happy with white playing knight takes knight here because pawn takes and you end up with quite a nice couple of pawns wedged in the center of the board. Nothing wrong with that at all. So move 9 after bishop c5, move 9, bishop to e3. It doesn't matter about blocking this pawn in because this bishop's developed in a different way. So bishop to e3 makes sense. It defends this square as well. And queen to b6 from Schlechter, so more pressure on this diagonal, and of course hitting this b2 pawn. We've seen this move queen b6 in all 3 games so far. Knight takes c6, and now not pawn takes, but bishop takes here was played in the game. And then it all gets very complicated. Knight takes, queen takes, bishop takes with check, the king to f1, and let's have a little look at what we've got here. So both sides have got 2 minor pieces, so that's all fine. Both sides have a queen, both sides have 2 rooks, but there's a slight imbalance in the pawns. Although they've got 5 each, white has an isolated pawn, and it should be noted that white can't castle, and this king is pretty stuck. And what that means is this rook is now pretty stuck because it can't get past the king. And all in all, the computer says -2 advantage black. That's why. So bishop to e6 is played, attacking the queen, developing a piece. Perfectly reasonable idea. Queen to f3 retreats. Now, why has it gone there? Well, now because if black takes this knight, black can take this bishop. So it's the only way to save some material. Bishop to e3 is played, so okay, now there is a threat on this knight because there's only 1 defender and 1 attacker, so the bishop's safe. So knight to b4 played by Vidmar, castles from Schlechter, and knight to c2 attacking the bishop. So the bishop's going to have to move, except it isn't going to have to move because, of course, queen here. And this is now threatening the knight. If the knight moves, then queen takes rook. So there's some problems here for Vidmar. What does he do? He plays queen takes bishop. Queen takes knight from white. And now we can see black is just a clear pawn up and white has ropey isolated pawns. Bishop takes b7 played by Vidmar, rook a to e8, lining the rook up to the queen. So the point is the threat now is bishop here check would uncover an attack and win the queen. Not surprisingly, Vidmar sees that, gets his queen out of the way, but now white has a clear, black has a clear winning move that makes the position -6, says the computer. If you want to hit pause and see if you can spot the move that Schlechter played, please do. Otherwise, I will play it in 3, 2, and 1, and the move's queen b2. Just a very simple fork of 2 pieces, no way to defend the rook and the bishop. And of course, if you move the rook away, let's say you play here after queen takes bishop, you've just got 2 grandmasters, but one of them's got an extra piece. And so at this point, Milan Vidmar resigned the game. Nice win for the Tarrasch Defense. Okay, we've got one more game for this video, but this one's much shorter. And let's get a new board and flip it. So we're looking from the black point of view. We are 2006. Danger is the place, and we've got Quintella against Mallet. So I don't know these two, but this game is resigned on move 10. So let's see where we go here. So d4, d5, c4, e6, and an early cd5. So white breaks the tension straight away. You will find this quite a lot, I suspect, at lower levels, particularly just breaking the tension straight away. And there's nothing wrong with it, by the way. Position's still completely level. Knight to c3, and I expect black can play all sorts of things here, but because we're doing Dr. Dave's opening, we know that c5 is coming. Queen to b3 from white, knight to f6 from black, so defending this square, and all pretty level at the minute. Bishop g5, perfectly reasonably pinning the knight and developing a piece, although you'll notice the computer's starting to edge towards black here. c4 from black, we've seen that twice now, this possibility of moving, releasing the tension by moving forward and fixing the pawn structure. And this obviously attacks the queen as well, so queen to b5. And the computer didn't like c4 very much, by the way, but position's still pretty level. Bishop to d7 to block the check. Now, this looks like it might be a blunder because it's just undefended this square. Well, let's see. Queen takes here. And there goes the bar to -5. So what on earth is the correct next move for black here? Well, I'll let you press pause if you wish to work it out. Otherwise, I'll carry on in 3, 2, and 1. And the move is bishop to c6. Remember, the bishops go backwards, so it's attacking the queen. And what exactly are you going to do? Where are you going to put the queen? Yeah, so you can't take the rook because of the bishop. You can't take the bishop because of the knight. You can't take the pawn because of the rook. Can't go here because of the knight. Can't go here because of the pawn. Can't go here because of this bishop. Can't go here because of this bishop. Can't go here because of this pawn. Can't go here because of the queen. Can't go here because of the queen. Can't go here because of pretty much everything on the board. Can't go here because of the bishop. And you can't go here because of the king. So your queen's trapped. So things to say, if we go back to move 8 in this position, white actually should be able to win a pawn themselves with the tactic. Bishop takes, ignoring the attack on your queen, but attacking the black queen instead. And so we'll just play that through to its logical conclusion. Sorry, wrong way around. King takes, knight takes, and you can see that looks pretty good for white. They're a straight piece up. What else can you do as black here? I guess you could play queen takes is probably better. What are we going to go for after queen takes? We're going to have to do queen takes d5, are we not? Yes. Oh, no, queen takes b7's okay now. Of course it is, because after this move this time, you actually have an escape route. You can play check. And so, yeah, that position there, white's absolutely fine. The other thing to say is after bishop g5, if I just put the moves on, you'll notice that in our game, black played c4, which, you know, is doable in some positions, but in this position, it's way short of being the recommended move. Computer's simply saying pawn takes pawn. And although the pawn structure is going to be a god-awful mess, and that really does all count as a god-awful mess, computer still thinks that black has slightly the better of said mess. So, okay, that is our first 5 games with the Tarrasch system. It's pretty confusing stuff with all that tension and swapping and what have you in the middle of the board. So I've got one more video, which I will do fairly soon with 5 more games in this. But if all of this stuff looks a bit confusing and a bit scary, fear not, because we do have 2 alternatives that are, should we say, less calculations, less tactical, as an alternative for you. But in the meantime, thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon with another 5 games in the Tarrasch system. Bye for now.